Hi, I'm John Feldt. This is the Texas and Southern Area Weekly Water Outlook. You know, I've been looking at areas to the north where there's been a lot of snow, been looking to the areas to the east where there's been a lot of rain. The southwest U.S. remains very quiet and dry. This week it looks like the jet stream is going to generally be to the north of the area, so it looks like, again, a very quiet week with the exception of the far east, maybe the far north, where there could be some modest amounts of precipitation. But again, I think the overall stories could be a very quiet week across most of Texas and Oklahoma, as well as other areas of the south and southwest. Stay tuned for more details in this week's Weekly Water Outlook.
Well, there was a bit of rain and some snow over parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Kansas over the last week. As usual, let's start off with the past 7-day precipitation. The area over Texas into southeast Oklahoma came in the form of rain and some heavier rain actually over these areas in yellow. That's 2 inches of rain, as much as a few little pockets estimated at nearly 3 inches of rain over southeast Oklahoma. Fairly broad area of rainfall between a ½ inch and an inch over central parts of Texas. And then we had that band of snow. I'm going to probably talk a little bit more about this, but this is the area of some snow that developed and headed up towards the northeast into Missouri and Illinois. But it originated in the northwest part of Texas, and very narrow band though. And that's actually gone as of this time. If we look at the past percent of normal precipitation over the last 7 days, those areas I mentioned that received precipitation, it averaged out a bit above normal for the week, especially in the part of northwest Texas. Now look how tight that gradient is there. It goes from well above normal to well below normal. Look at that right here. So if you're up in this area, you had a dry week. If you're in this area here, you had a pretty wet week, then dry, and a little bit wetter at that. So somewhat of a scattered pattern, and that snow band was very, very narrow. And I think it's interesting as we get late winter to look at some of the overall type of patterns that we've seen. And I think this is the graphic that will show this fairly well for the mid to late winter pattern across the south. And this is a percent of normal precipitation for the last 60 days. And I think really the pattern has been generally dry over almost all of Texas, and the exception would be this snow band that has occurred from the northwest part of the state of Texas across western parts of Oklahoma into parts of Kansas. And that has been repeated areas of snow. And you probably remember I've been talking about that once these patterns set up, they tend to remain in place often on a seasonal basis. And that's what we have seen so far this winter, that has been one of the more active snow bands, not just over the south, but sort of a national type of snow band. There have only been 2 or 3. One has been along the Great Lakes. One has been in the northeast U.S., which is very typical. And then we have this band here that extends over parts of the south into the Midwest. So generally speaking, from a winter standpoint, it's been dry over most of Texas, but then we've had this band of precipitation that has been more recent. I think over eastern parts of Oklahoma, it's picked up more recently, but it's a little bit more mixed because it started off drier. So just a quick review of snow. I did want to point out that this is the 7-day snowfall accumulations, just a bit over the northwest part of Texas. And really, if we look at what's on the ground, the snow depth, there's very little on the ground at all in Texas or Oklahoma, a bit over the western part of Kansas. Now, water equivalents, I know this isn't really in our area, but it's interesting to see over the upper Midwest this time of year, and that maroon color is getting close to 3 inches of water equivalent. So that'll be interesting over North Dakota and parts of Minnesota. It's beginning to pick up now, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when that melts later this spring. So across the south, even though there's been some recent improvement, for the most part, I think the tone is still We need more precipitation. You can see here from the U.S. Drought Monitor, there's still sizable areas of Kansas and Oklahoma that are reporting extreme drought and even exceptional drought in a few pockets over the western parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. Now, Texas has always been a little bit more hit or miss. There's some parts of Texas you can see with no drought at all, and there's still some pockets of extreme drought, so it's really hard to characterize over that region of Texas because it really is a hit or miss pattern. But I think Oklahoma and Kansas, especially the western half of those states, are still very, very dry. Now this winter, even though most winters do stay in a negative phase, it's not all that unusual. We can see this winter, I've outlined in the blue box here, that it's really been a winter of a negative phase Arctic oscillation. It really only got into that positive phase briefly towards the 1st of February, but for the most part it's been negative, and it's currently a negative phase, and it's forecast to remain generally in a negative phase as we get out through the middle of the March. That can actually bring some favorable precipitation patterns to the nation, but for the most part east of Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas. Now the exception would be these snow bands, but right now this is the big picture for this week. This is very typical of what we saw earlier this winter. We're going to have a system, and this is an upper jet stream pattern, so here's the upper jet stream right here. And what we have here are these pulses of energy that are rotating on through. They look like it'll be once again to the east of Texas and Oklahoma before it's able to pick up moisture. It's moderate in strength, but again, this is what we've seen before, is where the precipitation picks up generally far eastern parts of Texas, far southeast Oklahoma, and then much more toward Arkansas, and then further to the east. That leaves most of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas dry. Areas to the east would be significantly wetter. Now, if we look in the cold air, these are the surface low tracks, and again, for the most part, they're to the north. So this week, the energy with the systems both at the surface and aloft are either to the east of the region or to the north. Now, some of this colder air moisture could brush Kansas. The heavier snow I've outlined here in blue. This is a surface low track. But this time around, it looks like it's going to be further to the north. Most likely nothing significant in Texas or Oklahoma, more likely over northern parts of Kansas. So the rainfall forecast over the next 7 days, it leaves a large part of Texas with zero rainfall, western Oklahoma, zero rainfall. And then it begins to pick up in that pattern. If I probably put a precip forecast from earlier this winter on here, it would look very similar to this, with eastern parts of the state getting some rain, Arkansas getting about a ½ inch of rain on the average, but some spots up to 1 inch of rain, and then picking up further to the east. So for the most part, it looks like a pretty quiet week. Consequently, soil moisture will be gradually decreasing. We will have some increasing deficits, I guess I should say. A couple pockets could get some improvement, but for the most part, I think the trend is going to be for upper soils to be slowly drying out a bit over the next 2 weeks. Now, I wanted to look out a little bit further just to see if there are any signs of change, and I really don't see anything right now. Now, further off to the east for parts of Arkansas, Louisiana on east, it looks like late March there could be a significant system there, and that's that area in orange. This is way out there, so keep that in mind that this could really change. But for West Texas, West Oklahoma, and probably southwest Kansas, it looks pretty quiet right now, at least through the rest of the month. Perhaps a little bit more activity over the far eastern part. So pretty much a quiet pattern. The takeaway points this week, some rain mainly east, especially Arkansas. Otherwise, a fairly quiet week. And I did want to mention this week I'm going to be at the Texoma Cattlemen's Conference, so if any of you are going to that conference, please stop by and say hi. Let me know that you listened to this briefing, and feel free to give me any suggestions on how I can improve them. I look forward to meeting you and attending this conference. I will be updating this again next week and issuing information throughout the week if something looks interesting. Thank you for listening.